So, Total War 40k is a-coming, but what can we really expect from it? There's been a few dev interviews and a tiny little bit of gameplay in the trailer. Well, today we're going to try and piece together a little bit of a visual, but I do have the awkward position that if you saw my announcement video, I have actually played Total War 40k just a little bit, so I know a few things, but I basically have to pretend I don't. Although, honestly, my memory's hazy of what I played anyway, so I don't actually really remember that much. So I'll be talking from the perspective of how I imagined Total War 40k to be before I knew about it, but we'll try to piece together things a little bit based off what devs have said in the interviews. Truthfully, I am having to play dumb a bit here, but honestly, I don't actually know the answers to most of my questions. The first way I imagined it could have worked is on a single planet offering the traditional Total War experience, although having loads of little settlements scattered around probably wouldn't have made much sense. It's not like there's loads of villages all over the planets in 40k, so it would rather be more of a collection of city-like settlements. Maybe doing something like Shogun where you have the main settlement itself and then you have these little places around that you can take. They might be a farm or a mine and they offer you resources, but they can be attacked and disrupted by enemy forces. So I thought that maybe that was an option. Or if they were going to do multiple planets, it would be like a bunch of smaller campaign maps all in different biomes. A forest world, a humid jungle planet, an icy tundra planet, a scorching desert world, or the worst of all, the absolutely putrid and vile lands of France. So yeah, imagine like the Immortal Empires map broken up into like 30 smaller maps, and I imagine that to be different planets. The only other option I thought they could have gone with is something like how Dawn of War used to do it, where you're more kind of in orbit looking down on the planet and it's broken up into regions and you capture those with the armies against enemy armies, and it's more like a little bit of a chess game or something, but this doesn't really give traditional Total War vibes. But what we do know is that it's definitely interplanetary from this little snippet we got in the trailer. And we can see some of the campaign buttons in the corner here, and it's anybody's guess what they do. Some of them are kind of obvious, others not so much. And we can see a couple of currencies and an end turn button as well. And it's this end turn button that makes it feel like this is the campaign map now, because that's always where the end turn button is in Total War campaigns, right? It's on the campaign map. So instead of taking settlements across the campaign map, we'll be taking planets, and different planets will have different things to offer you, different resources, maybe different buildings, different structures. So instead of having a single settlement like we do in Warhammer that produces your food, your military, your income, you'll now have separate planets for that. You'll build your military on one planet, you'll get your food from another planet, etc. That's a guess anyway, I don't actually know. But it did mention in the dev interview about planets having regions, so if you take a hive city, that'll help you through the other regions of the planet, they said. So there's going to be more to it than just taking the planet like a settlement. One curious thing that was said in the dev interview, which I quote, "Because you took that hive city, you've now got a staging point to advance across the other regions of the planet, each of which themselves will be a kind of different battle type." So that sounds pretty interesting to me, to have different regions be different battle types. Does that mean it's like land battle, siege battle, minus settlement battle? Maybe more battle types, or does that mean something else different entirely? And then in one of the interviews they mentioned zooming out from the planet. You'll be on like a fleet level, so your fleets are going to be a big part of the game, and this assumedly is how you travel around the campaign map. The way your armies travel around on a normal Total War campaign map, that's maybe how your fleets are going to travel around. You'll have a movement range, you can only go so far, and then you end turn, you get some more, etc. And there would also be various things floating around in space to explore, like a space hulk or a little space station that maybe you could take or capture or explore for some kind of gain. And that's led many people to wonder whether there's going to be space combat, if you're going to be upgrading your fleet, making them stronger, and then either engaging in real-time space battles or just some kind of auto-resolve. I heard people mention boarding battles would be cool as well. And to give a bit of visual to this whole scale, I'm going to use Stellaris here. Don't get too excited, this is just Stellaris. But naturally, like many space games, it works in this kind of way. You have planets, they have different resources, different things to offer you, and then you zoom out, you've got your fleets, and that's how you travel around. And you'll be moving around entire solar systems, trying to see which planets you want, which ones are useful to you, or which ones the enemy might be trying to take that might be useful to them, but you want to stop them. But that's just one solar system in a galaxy of many. And so the scale here is just absolutely insane, and we see this visual in the trailer where it pans out and we see what is essentially the entire galaxy, assumedly the 40k universe in its entirety, Great Rift in all. And so we have to wonder how the hell we're going to interact with all of this on such a huge scale. How is the warp going to work? And genuinely, I have no idea. I don't know the answers to most of the questions I'm asking here. I've only seen a very small portion of the game, so it's crazy to think about the entire scale of the game. You know, how long is it going to take to conquer a solar system of, say, 5 or 6 planets? An hour, 6 hours, 10 hours, who knows? And then we got like 100 of those. So yeah, the sheer scale is going to be absolutely insane, and in dev interviews they've mentioned how campaigns, if you do a campaign, it's only a small part of kind of an overarching narrative. So it's like you play one campaign and it's not like you then restart. It's like you play another campaign, but your other campaign has still happened. It's still part of history. It just happened in another part of the galaxy, and your consequences there and your actions there and your outcome there is going to affect this other campaign that you do. Something like that. It's incredibly confusing. I'm not even really sure. One thing we can sort of get our head around, though, is these crusade theaters that they refer to. And again, I'm taking this from the dev interview. Maybe I'm misinterpreting it. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it. But what it sounded like is that these could be campaigns of varying size. Let's say it's like this little part of the galaxy. So 5 systems here. And across this crusade theater, there's a narrative going on. Let's say orcs are trying to take over these systems to get some buffs for their vehicles or to be able to build more vehicles. And they're advancing through these systems, taking them all as they go. But the Imperium has stepped in, the Astra Militarum is there to stop the orcs advancing, and that's the narrative, right? Orcs are trying to take these systems, Imperium's trying to stop them. Which side do you want to support? So if you're playing as the Space Marines, naturally you're going to support the Imperium, you're going to try and stop the orcs and win those planets and systems for the Astra Militarum. Or if you're playing as the orcs, maybe you want to help the orcs get those buffs for their vehicles, and then maybe if you're the orcs, you'll get those buffs for your vehicles as well. And then let's say the orcs won that campaign, they won that crusade theater. Now you'll find that when you face the orcs elsewhere in a different campaign, they might have better or more vehicles. And that's a completely made up example, but that's how I can imagine these things working. And while that was just that one reasonably sized campaign, there might be others of a similar size. There might be massive, much more bigger conflicts, smaller ones, or even just single battles in a certain conflict. So yeah, you're going to seemingly have this one living universe with multiple campaigns that you'll play in it, rather than just a single campaign which you restart and it's like a whole new world. And then there's mention of a flashpoint system and flashpoint battles, which sounds like just a single battle that you play to help resolve a conflict. So overall, just a crazy sounding system all round. One thing we do have to be aware of, though, is the term scale, and they've mentioned a few times how scale is going to be important for this, and it's a big selling point, but as game history has taught us, scale doesn't always translate to a better experience. Starfield, for example, promised massive scale and loads of planets, and there's like 1,000 planets, and hey, it turns out they're all mostly empty, boring as fuck, with maybe one generic base on them. Brilliant. Woo, scale. I think most people would probably prefer just 10 well-crafted, interesting, explorable planets, rather than 1,000 mostly empty ones. So we do have to wonder how they're going to fill the entire 40k universe, especially with just 4 factions to start with. Or I do wonder if they'll lock off portions of the galaxy at first and then expand it over time as they add more factions and can fill it in a bit better. As for the factions themselves, using Dawn of War here, Astra Militarum, of course, going to be the more traditional Total War style faction with infantry, vehicles, artillery. In campaign, they're going to run off resources and economy and such, apparently. Whereas the Space Marines, they're of course going to be a much smaller army, much smaller numbers, but much more powerful individual entities. It was mentioned they're not going to be relying on infrastructure and things like that, maybe resources, so they're going to work quite differently from, say, the Astra Militarum. And then there's the boys, of course, the orcs. They will somewhat rely on resources and such, but also momentum. So assumedly, that means they want to keep fighting as much as possible. And then the Eldari, blech, they're supposedly going to be the most different faction, working very differently from anything in Total War before, apparently, relying more on sneaky stealth tactics and subterfuge, and their webway gates to teleport them around. So all sounding like very different factions with very different playstyles, and this is one of the biggest things I'm personally looking forward to. Having 24 factions or whatever in Total War Warhammer is cool and all, but there's been so much added to the game, so many new units, that a lot of the factions' kind of unique identities have kind of dissolved a bit the more units they've got and the more their rosters have been filled out. I look forward to getting back into some multiplayer with Total War 40k, where there's not so much to learn. Just 4 asymmetric factions that you have to learn their strengths and weaknesses and how you can use those or exploit those. That's always a big fun part of the tactics and strategy of Total War, which is of course in tabletop Warhammer as well. And of course, the curious subject of battles is an interesting one at this point. We can see some footage in the trailer and it does look like a Total War game for the most part. It's a lot more shooty, of course. We know there's a cover system in the game. We know there's strafing. How exactly cover is going to work, we can't really tell from looking at this. There was a few guardsmen stood behind some cover, but that was about it. Hopefully the depth remains there again. I want tactics and strategy. I don't just want to mash units into each other mindlessly. That's not fun to me. The most concerning thing that strikes me about this little bit of footage we've seen is that it seems to be on some kind of siege settlement with a lot of choke points. The main focus of the battle taking place on a bridge where, notoriously, you can't really do a lot, especially with a bunch of gun units that all shoot in straight lines. It's not as if they can shoot over the men in front of them. But also if we zoom in on the map itself, we can see a lot of little black spot areas. Is this kind of impassable terrain of the map? In which case, this map is largely just a whole load of choke points, which is reminiscent of a Total War Warhammer Siege battle, which is arguably the worst part of Total War Warhammer battles. Now, of course, we can see that this battle is taking place in a city, and I'm sure there will be plenty of land battles in more open space, but I do wonder what percentage, right? Am I going to have mostly land battles? Am I going to have mostly siegey battles like this? Am I actually going to have room to maneuver my units and apply my strength to the enemy weaknesses, or am I just going to have to mash blobs into each other in these choke points until somebody wins? Or just get the enemy to blob up and then drop an orbital laser on them and destroy them all in 3 seconds? The other problem with CG style battles is of course the AI, the pathfinding, all the bugginess. If that's going to be there, this is going to be a problem. Maybe the new engine will make the AI much better. We'll have to wait and see. There's also been destruction and customization talked about, and those things are cool and all, but I hope they're not supposed to be main selling points of the game, because, well, that's not what Total War is all about. So a lot to wonder about with Total War 40k at this point, and as I say, I don't know the answer to most of these questions here, but that being said, and the concerns I've mentioned in this video being present, I am very excited for Total War 40k, and I look forward to learning more about the game. Hopefully in the new year we'll get some gameplay or something to properly understand all the systems of the game and see how this is shaping up as a Total War title. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. Do consider supporting the channel through YouTube memberships or Patreon if you wish. Otherwise, I will see you in the future.